a defense and technological industrial basis. We've also seen, as Radek just said, for the second time in its history, the European Union decide to issue 90 billion euros worth of bonds on international markets to shelter Ukraine against any financial difficulty for the 2 years to come and to place Ukraine in a position of strength should a genuine negotiation start. But now, of course, we need to accelerate on this, just like many other countries in the world are doing. And as President Macron said, and as Prime Minister Carney said here in Davos this week, while we're building a strategic autonomy, this doesn't mean that we're going to, disappear from the global scene. To the very contrary, we're seeing a lot of interest by regions of Southeast Asia, Africa, Latin America, that themselves are not willing to be dragged into this growing conflictuality between the two superpowers, and that are seeking partnerships and coalitions to ensure their strategic autonomy, but also to solve some of the issues that reach beyond borders. And Europe, that is probably one of the most advanced political coalitions of all times, has a lot to offer in this time where people are trying to rebuild something to the interest of their people.
Minister, do you think that not only the developments this week, but maybe more, even some of the other recent developments, do you think this is going to be putting the efforts around European defense capabilities in an overdrive? Is this going to accelerate? Do you expect new measures on the policy side as well as on the industrial side as a result of these developments?
Certainly. We've seen this agenda accelerate after COVID-19. We've seen it accelerate after the launch of the, well, let me back up. After COVID-19, the EU launched the first bond emission in its history to fund a major recovery plan that has allowed our economy to sustain the shock. After the beginning of the war in Ukraine, we have sat down in Versailles, the city where I live, in March 2022 to draft a strategic autonomy agenda for a number of sectors that are critical to sustain shocks like these ones. So I'm expecting that tonight, when the leaders of Europe meet, they will discuss the lessons to be drawn by what happened this week, where Europe has shown some calm, but also some strengths, which speaks to its ability to deter threats to its interests, but also, I guess, the path forward in terms of building this strategic autonomy, including in the field of defense and security. And there is hope, because when I look at what happened in Paris 2 weeks ago, when the coalition of the willing got together at the leaders level to endorse the military planification involving more than 30 countries, in close cooperation with NATO, but outside of NATO, given that security guarantees for Ukraine are a continental-sized problem, but that could not be solved in NATO, I think there is room and space for hope that we Europeans are able to take our own security in charge, but also to be security providers, because we've shown this in recent times.
Thank you. I'll stay with the transatlantic relationship. I'll go to also Nir and Mina on that, and then we'll touch upon other issues. If I could go to you, Nir. So now it's become fashionable to say that geopolitics is material to business and that it is really driving a lot of business strategies. Is it true? And then if it's true, are developments that we're seeing, for example, this week here, really materially impacting how you make your business decisions?
So the short answer is yes, big time. And let's step back for a second, because I think you have to kind of process everything beyond what's happening here this week. At Bridgewater, our goal is to understand how the world works. This is what we've been doing for the last 50 years. And we'd say that we're going through probably the most dramatic period of change that we will go through in our lifetime. It's one of those periods of change that happen once in 100 years, basically. You can split it in many different ways. Let's just cut it in two, because it's kind of what the conversation has been here about. One is geopolitical, macro 180, basically. Going from decades and decades of globalization, we're kind of marching down that path, and then in a minute, turning around to what we call at Bridgewater modern mercantilism, which is instead of being focused on globalization and efficiency, being focused on self-sufficiency, national interest. It's just a whole new architecture. Dramatic change. It's happening at the same time where we're going through a technological disruption that is hard for us to process. And I'm not even talking about the speculation of what's going to happen with productivity. I'm talking about what's happening now. We're in the middle of a technological arms race. The biggest powers in the world, nations and companies, are spending like their lives depend on it. And those two things are already the main drivers of markets. So one could look from the far and say, well, it doesn't look like it's changing, but it's changed tremendously. If you look under the surface, what's happening really is that the one phenomenon is currently offsetting the other. Meaning the impact of modern mercantilism, the tariffs, the questioning of US exceptionalism is being offset by policy, expensive monetary and fiscal policy, but more than anything, a massive capex cycle, the biggest that we've ever seen. And just to give you a taste of it, under the surface, look, if you look at last year, I heard many times people say, look, but the S&P, it all looks the same. It's not the same. The S&P did well in dollar terms. In global currency terms, it was the first time in 15 years that the US equity market underperformed global markets, meaning it was the first time that it didn't pay off to be completely concentrated in the US. Another great example is gold. People talk about kind of the gold rally. Gold has doubled since 2024, but when you ask yourself why, what it really means is that people that were holding their wealth in either dollars or dollar-denominated assets don't feel safe enough to be that concentrated, and they're migrating to gold in a massive way. And lastly, a lot of conversation over the last couple of days about the strong top-line US GDP numbers. They're strong, but underneath the surface, more than half of that number is that capex arms race. You take that out, it's sluggish. So kind of the people not processing what is really driving the economy, it's exactly what everybody here is talking about. It's secular forces that combine policy and economics much more currently than kind of the boom-bust cycle that we used to be, inflation, growth. And it's here to stay. It's only going to get bigger, I think, over the next couple of years.
So are you saying that, and we've heard it here as well, that beyond the short term, on the economic side and the market side, beyond the short term, maybe positive outlook or more positive than people thought, we should watch out?
Say it again. Ask the question again.
Are you saying that, because you were implying that we should be looking beyond just the GDP growth numbers, so are you saying that there are headwinds that we may be not pricing in right now, not only with regard to the US economy, but overall with regard to the world economy?
Yes, I'm saying that to be a good investor now, you have to wrap your head around these secular changes. You have to ask yourself, the world is transforming from a globalization macro framework to a different one. How is that going to work? What is Europe going to do? What is China going to do? What is the US going to do? It's happening at the same time that they're all battling a must-win technological battle. What is that going to do? That is today the single most important thing you have to wrap your head around, and it's a massive change. If we were sitting here 2 years ago, people would be talking about inflation. Is it going to be inflation? It's not going to be inflation. What's going to happen with growth and not growth? They wouldn't be talking about these things. So, yes, that is a dramatic change and something that the entire financial sector is extremely focused on right now.
Thank you. Mina, I think you wanted to come in. I have a question for you, but why did you come in?
Well, I wanted to come in because another trend that we always took for granted was oil. And the fact that all these geopolitical developments that are happening haven't raised the price of oil, because the market's actually flooded. So it's really interesting to see that even making the 5-year, 10-year assessments that business leaders were doing globally, including in our part of the world, It's not the same because geopolitical turbulence isn't affecting oil prices in the same way that they used to. In addition to that, that nexus of energy, capital, and political will to be involved in this AI race. I mean, we're seeing again in the Middle East, importantly in the UAE, what's happening with Stargate. These are changes that are a turning point. Some are very troubling and some are positive because it's actually allowing newer players, smaller players to feel that they can take an opportunity and carve out a place for themselves. So it is worrying, but I'd also say on the business side, you're seeing new actors and players have a role.
Thank you. I heard there was someone from, not from Europe, who said that the Europeans should just calm down, that maybe there's just too many emotions around what's taking place. So you're based in the GCC, and if I look at recent history, there has been, of course, a certain view on the conflict in Ukraine, for example, etc. So how do you think the GCC is looking at the current transatlantic relationship?
I think there's a pause when it comes to what does the US want and what role does the United States want to play internationally. For the GCC, for the wider Arab world, there were a number of moments when they realized you can't rely on the United States. The US is an ally, they have good relations, they have interests, but it is purely based on interests. Many of us didn't buy into the fact that the US was working for a value-based order. A values-based order was hard interests. And unfortunately, I think we're really seeing that come to life. I think sometimes people hear those from the GCC, from the Arab world, speak almost that they're being crude, or but they say at least with this current presidency, things are much clearer and much more transactional because they were previously transactional with other parts of the world, and unfortunately, we're seeing this play out in Europe. And I would say on the issue of Ukraine, there was a lot of misunderstanding, almost as though in the GCC there wasn't concern about this. There is concern about that. I mean, I live in Abu Dhabi. I speak quite often not only to UAE officials, but officials from the GCC, where it's clear for them that the issue of sovereignty is hugely important, and the world order we all got very comfortable with is important. And of course, Iraq's invasion of Kuwait, we had the Prime Minister of Qatar here on this stage yesterday say that much of the troubles we're living with in the region can actually, in part, be traced back to the invasion of Kuwait by Iraq, but also the continued occupation of Palestine. We have this soar on international humanitarian law and international law in general that we have suffered from for decades. UN Security Council resolutions no longer mattered because the resolutions on Palestine are violated every day. And so now when we see it's a conflict in Europe, there are concerns, absolutely. But it is, and you know, people talk about double standards in a flippant way. It's not about double standards. It's to say, like a constitution, if you violate it once, it becomes almost impossible. So there's view on the transatlantic tension, but there's also hope that it doesn't lead to further escalation because we don't need more conflicts.
Thank you. Minister, I think you wanted to come in on this.
Yeah, I actually disagree on the way this thing is presented, because I've heard it as well here in Davos, and not only by yourself, this idea that basically the US were doing something without saying it, and now they're doing exactly the same, but they're basically not shy of saying what they do. I think this is not what's happening. I think the US have chosen to change their approach to multilateralism. I'm not saying that multilateralism was perfect, that international law was always respected, that it was not biased, that it was not politicized, but there was something deep into American politics that was committed to multilateralism. And why? Well, some will say for values. I would say for interest, because the US drew maximum dividends from multilateralism. Dividends in terms of security. They were able, through the peacekeeping operations at the UN, to outsource part of their efforts to secure the world. And the same thing happened in large part through NATO. Currency dividends, the exorbitant privilege, the fact of setting, through Bretton Woods, the dollar as a currency of reserve, created or lowered the cost for the US to finance their economy and their budget. Trade dividends, through the WTO, imperfect as it may be, they were able to export their digital and their financial services throughout the world, and of course open their markets to the exports of their partners. But they drew extraordinary dividends from multilateralism. They're making a different choice, but it's not clear at all that this will be in their interests. This can be questioned. And this also has implications for all of us and our own approach to multilateralism. And as I said earlier, countries like France and I think Poland and in Europe, we still think that multilateralism or pluralism or coalitions are valuable to defend your own interests. And that, of course, values matter, and that you should avoid at all costs double standard, because at some point in history, every country in the world needs the protection of international law. So if you've been a faithful protector of international law, then you can hope to be protected by international law. But anyway, that's a separate discussion.
Thank you. Just a quick reaction, then
very
we'll move on.
I wasn't saying the US is doing what it's always done and it just sounds different now. But clearly, this is a marked deviation from what they wanted. But it's more the idea that now we're seeing it play out in other areas, and we've suffered from some of that.
Thank you. We've touched, I think some of you mentioned China. If we could speak about China a little bit. Deputy Prime Minister, I think, if I'm not mistaken, you I think in September, met the foreign minister there. But overall, how would you describe the European approach, foreign policy-wise or trade-wise, if you want to comment, toward China? And has it been clarified? There was certain nervousness maybe a year ago, 2 years ago, around the trade relationship. Has it dissipated, or is it still something that is top of mind for European leaders?
So for a few years, until a couple of years ago, China was doing wolf warrior diplomacy. It didn't work. Now it's the United States' turn. In my previous job, I was a member of the European Parliament, and I co-authored the Parliament's position on China, which, to be succinct in a slogan, collaborate where possible, compete where needed, confront where necessary. So it's a much more complex relationship than the one between the West and the Soviet Union in the past. China is, of course, our biggest trading partner, mostly deficit, but still. And so it is a challenge. But we need to respond to this extraordinary rise of this great civilization. I mean, the number of engineers that they have, the number of fast trains, the domination of various markets, but also to an attempt at blackmail. I mean, China tried to do to us what the United States tried to, in terms of critical materials, what the US has tried, to do in the area of chips. But that they would even consider such a move should be a wake-up call.
Thank you. Could I go to you, Nir, as well on China? There is a lot of interest in understanding the Chinese economy from an investor's lens. How would you evaluate it? Is it more investable than 2 years ago, less investable?
So I'll make two comments, because I also want to refer back to some of the comments that have been said here before about the Middle East. But I would say two things are important to keep in mind. The way we got here is the entire world was on a path to globalization, like I said before. China was always playing a different game. China was always playing the game of a state-driven economy where protecting national interests. In one way, we're all now playing China's game. The conversion is kind of, and it's classic game theory, where you need everybody to collaborate because it's enough that one person is, trying to stick it to others or just working within their self-interest, and the entire game starts to shift. So they're better at playing this because they've been playing this for a long time and pretty successfully. That's kind of one thing to keep in mind. And then on whether it's investable, I would say China and Asia more broadly play an incredibly important role in people's portfolios, and they're almost always underweight for many, many reasons. So in a world that is fragmented, that has such US concentration, which is built up over decades, China is actually, and again, broader Asia, is one of the best diversifiers that you can have. Bridgewater's been in China for 40 years, including onshore. We're the largest foreign manager onshore. And even through the last couple of years where, people could say China's had its struggles, our fund there returned north of 30% per year. So definitely investable, definitely plays an important part in people's portfolios. Can I make one more comment on the things I've said before? It's going to shift to a different topic. I have to. First of all, on the history lesson on the Middle East and Israel, the UN made decisions in 48 that were contested not by Israel that started this entire fight. So the way to work through our differences, which are important because I totally agree on the suffering is terrible. Also the suffering of October 7th, the suffering of hostages that have been held for years, and the suffering in Gaza, terrible. We can't always choose to start the conversation from the place that's most comfortable to us. And to step back, I'd say that about the world more broadly a little bit, because these changes are so massive. The biggest question is not whether things are going to change, it's how are we going to come out of this on the other side? It's going to be better or it's going to be worse. Yeah. And I would go to the 1930s, not because it's the same, but because these changes happen once in 100 years. I think it's a good way to kind of look at, we had disenfranchised people and disenfranchised nations that made political choices to challenge the world order. By the way, we had a backdrop of a technological race for nuclear capabilities that promised world dominance and ability to set the new world order, and it ended with Bretton Woods and the nuclear bomb and the end of the World War, and started an era that lasted up until now. Because what's happening now is, again, disenfranchised people within nations, disenfranchised nations, are saying, I'm going to make political choices that are going to change the world order. Again, we have the backdrop of a technological arms race that promises world dominance and the ability to set the next world order. And the question about whether this is going to end up in a massive war, I'm the grandchild of a grandmother that lost her entire family in the Holocaust, is up to the people here in Davos. Are we going to manage it well, or are we going to let it get out of control? And for that, we both have to put each other in each other's shoes and say, we owe this to so many people that rely on us. Not to just argue our position, but to say, how do we manage through change well?
Can I respond? Because it wasn't a history lesson. Yeah. I'm a student of history. It would take us much more than 45 minutes for me to go through the history of the Middle East.
I actually want to go to another diplomatic development here, which is the Board of Peace that was launched here. Maybe I could start with you, Mina, and you can all come in if you want. So how do you look at it? How does this then relate, in your view, to the chance of sustainable peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians?
I mean, look, I think it's best for Israelis and Palestinians to talk about what the chance of peace is, because ultimately it'll be for them to decide. The Board of Peace comes after much suffering, but also comes after much failure of all the processes. I mean, the peace process became something that was managed. Meetings were held on a regular basis just so that somebody could say, oh, we're trying to solve this, and nothing. So good for anyone who thinks we're going to come up with a plan and we're going to pull people. You know, you had people on stage there from various countries, some immediately affected and some surprising. You wouldn't expect that they're involved. So I think that's important, to get that buy-in, to get and renewed energy. Whatever you think of the Trump administration, when they want to put their mind to something, they can pull people together. So let's try something new. But it was interesting that the Palestinian voice that we heard from Dr. Ali Sharf, who's highly respected, came through video conference for whatever logistical reasons. And it would be interesting to see how they're going to be able to implement on the ground. So I, for one, think we have to give it, it's the only game in town, so you have to give it all the support possible and also try to bring people to the table to deliver after the phases that we know about to get to eventual real peace. And I think that is what's fair for the Israelis, the Palestinians, and the wider region. But I think to write off the board of peace just because people don't like the style of the Trump administration or the way that it's happened would be wrong, because we need it to succeed.
Thank you. I'll go to all of you on that, Minister.
Yeah, we've worked a lot over the past year on this issue alongside Saudi Arabia and a number of other friends and partners. This work has culminated with a declaration, a text that indeed led all of us to step in each other's shoes. And that says basically, beyond the ceasefire, the humanitarian help, and the liberation of hostages, that Hamas should be called for what it is, a terrorist organization, condemned for its crime and excluded for any future of the governance in Palestine. That there should be an integration of Israel and the Arab countries that would lead them to stand into regional organizations such as the one we've seen grow in Asia or in Europe. And there should be a right to self-determination for the Palestinian people in a Palestinian state that would be demilitarized and that would be democratic. This declaration that was adopted at the General Assembly at the UN on September 12th at an overwhelming majority of nations, 142 against 10, opened the path, I believe, to the US-led efforts that came together during the high-level week at the UN, leading to the peace plan that President Trump presented, and that we've supported without reservation because it had been consulted with our Arab partners and because it mentioned this legitimate aspiration of the Palestinian people to statehood. And in the same way, we've supported the resolution of the Security Council that gives a legal basis for the Trump peace plan, and we've committed to support it in as much as we could and in many different ways. And what happened today was positive in the sense that we're seeing movement from phase 1 to phase 2 of the plan. We've heard that the US team announced that the Rafah passage might open. We've heard the US team mention repeatedly that the coordination and contact with the Palestinian Authority was live, which is all of what we need to avoid, this phase 1 of the ceasefire to come at a standstill. And so now we need to go further. If there were reservations, they have nothing to do with the Trump team or the style or anything. No, there was one question raised about the charter of the Board of Peace, its connection with the UN Security Council resolution that created the Board of Peace, and its focus. This morning, the inauguration of the Board of Peace was focused on Gaza, which is what we were expecting, and I think this is the right direction.
Thank you. We're almost at the end, so Nir, and then I'll close with Deputy Prime Minister. Nir first.
So super quickly, I totally agree, 100%. You cannot overstate the, put style aside, the positive impact President Trump, Wickoff, Jared Kushner have had on the region in delivering outcomes, not preaching, but actually delivering outcomes, starting from the Abraham Accords, that even through an incredibly tough several years have held up, and now in bringing people together. So I think it's really important to focus on the problem and the people that are actually making progress towards solving the problem and preventing suffering that has to stop. And it is important to get behind those people that have been delivering outcomes and call that out. So we totally agree on that.
Thank you. Deputy Prime Minister.
Well, we appreciate the intention. Poland supports a two-state solution. We've recognized Palestine for decades. We also believe in Israel's right to secure existence within internationally recognized borders. But as Jean-Noël mentioned, the charter of the Peace Council is a very unusual document. And it requires study. And also its status is not yet clear to us. So, for example, in our constitutional system, it would require full ratification. And I understand it will not go to ratification by the US Senate. So you know, this is very fresh. We need more time to study.
Thank you so much, all of you, for actually a discussion which I like. So you were reacting to each other. I hope, of course, we could go on for a long time, but at least we touched upon some of the key things that are shaping the geopolitical landscape. So thank you so much. I'll give you the applause, if I could. Thank you.